Hi everyone, Alex again. Today we're covering objects and later on we'll talk about classes. This is the final week of sort of new syntax, new JavaScript techniques that we're learning. It's a little bit tricky, but if you get arrays, we're sort of going to build on our knowledge of arrays to talk about objects. So objects are a way of storing data. Similar to arrays, we can store multiple variables in one variable, so in an object variable. But unlike arrays, where we would have an array for, say, x positions, an array for y positions, an array for radiuses, we can store the x position, y position, and radius of some shape in one object. So let's have a look at the syntax. I'm going to make a person object, and I'm going to leave it declared at the top here, just like any other variable. We declare it with let, and I'm going to initialize it down here in setup. So person is equal to, and to make an object, we use the curly braces. So similar to if statements, for loops, functions, we've seen these used for blocks. Today we're using them to create an object. So just like an array, inside an object we can list out our values, but unlike an array where things are accessed with some kind of index, like index 0, 1, 2, objects use names for their values. So a person has an age, so we write age colon, and I'm say 24, so we'll make me. So age 24. I want to add another value, so I'm going to put a comma, and now let's put my first name. So first name is Alex. All right, so as you can see here, we've created an object and we're storing multiple different variables in them. You can see that we can have numbers for one of them, we can have a string for another. Let's add another parameter here, so another element to our object. I'm a student, so I have supervisors, and I have two of them, so this would be an array. So Kaz is one of my supervisors and Marcus is my other one. So you can see now I've got this nice object, it's got a lot of information about me in it, and so now we might want to access this data. So we've actually already learnt the syntax for doing this in previous weeks. We've sort of glanced over it a little bit, but it's this dot notation. So if I want the age of this person object, I simply write person.age, and this is going to give me 24. If I wrote person.firstname, it's going to give me Alex. And just to demonstrate this, let's just print it out to the console. So console.log person.firstname, we should see down here in the console we're going to get Alex printed out. And in fact, sometimes you can print out the whole object, often, and it'll just give you all of that information listed out here. And so you can see here, all of that info is printed out to the console. All right, so objects are great for just making, one little person here, but their real power comes in to when we want to make an array full of objects. So in previous weeks, if we wanted to have information about a lot of circles, we would need an array for the x, y, radius, maybe the color. We'd need a whole lot of arrays, one array for every different parameter. As you can see now, all of our information is stored in just one object, and so we just need an array of these objects. So let's turn this into a circle example. I'm going to make a circles array up here, so an empty array. And down here in setup, I'm going to loop through some num circles, and I'm going to fill up my array. So let's do a basic for loop here. For let I equals 0, I less than num circles, I plus plus. And what we can do in here is we can say circles I, so each element in our array, is going to be equal to some object. Now let me just get rid of this person stuff. We're going to be dealing with circles now. So each of my circles is going to have an x location. So something random, like a random width. It's going to have a y coordinate, so y, random height. And it's also going to have a radius, so I'm just going to call this radius. And let's just make that random too, so something like between 10 and 100. So you can see here, we're filling up our circles array with objects representing a circle. So they have x, y, radius. You could add a color variable here. You could add other information as well. So we've got our array set up, and so now down here in draw, we can simply loop through and access it. So for let I equals 0, I could do I less than num circles, but maybe later on I'm going to add more than my original number. So let's do circles.length. and I++. So we're looping through every single circle in our array. So circles I is going to talk about each of the circles in our array. So what I want to do here is I'm going to access circles y.x, circles I.y, and circles I.radius. Radius. And so this is going to be my circle command here. So circle takes in an x, y, and a radius. So I'm getting all of that information out of my array. And instead of having 3 different arrays, I have one array storing 3 different values in it. So an x, y, and a radius. So hopefully you can see why this is a little bit neater than having multiple arrays, one for every parameter. And if we need to add some new element, like say a fill color is a random color, then it's not too hard for us to add some new parameter here. Okay, so I could add this in here. I could get my circles I.fillCol. And so the code is a lot neater. It's also a bit easier to understand because we're talking about circle objects, and that's how it's represented in code. Great. So this is going to lead us into the first challenge today, which is using objects. And what we've got here is a setup where we have some objects already created for you. You can see here I've made a function to set up all of my objects called setUpShapes. And similar to what I was just doing there, we're looping through and setting elements in my array. And then down here in this other function I made drawShapes, we actually loop through and draw our circles in this case. What we want you to do now is extend this example. So if I run it, you'll see it's just a bunch of circles along the X middle of the screen. So if we want to add some Y coordinates, we want you to add some colors, and also maybe think about changing the shapes. So I've got this cool little idea here where I have a string which represents what shape I want. So I could like write triangle, and then down here I'm using an if statement to draw a circle, or I would do else if it equals triangle, draw a triangle, else if it's equal to square, draw a square, etc. So that's a nice little technique if you want to make multiple shapes. But really the exercise here is just getting comfortable with basic objects and displaying them to the screen down here. This challenge will take about 15 minutes, and once you're done, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about classes. So pause the video here for about 15 minutes, extend this example here to include a Y coordinate, think about adding color and different shapes, and then we'll come back and continue with this video. Okay? Alright, so now we're going to talk about classes. Classes are really useful and unlock the full power of objects, but they can be a bit hard to understand, so we'll just take our time going through some examples today. Everyone has a different analogy for how objects and classes work. The one I like to use is that classes are a bit like a cookie cutter, and objects are like the cookies that they produce. A lot of people would just say that classes are basically like a template for your objects, and that's basically what they are. So feel free to ask your tutor if they've got a better analogy. Everyone has a different one, but that's, I use the cookie analogy. So similar to how a function lets us easily reuse code, a class lets us easily produce objects based on some kind of template. So I'm going to make a class now, and I'm just going to stick with my analogy and actually make a class that produces cookie objects. So I'm going to write class, and then the name of my class, I'm going to call it cookie cutter. And you might notice straight away that I've capitalized the first letter. And this is what you should always do with classes. So unlike normal camel case, in this situation we want to capitalize the first letter. And so this lets you know that you're talking about a class. You might also notice I've put it down the bottom here outside of function setup or outside of draw. Alright, so now we open up a big block, and everything inside here is our class template. It's describing how our class works. So let's set up our cookie cutter class. The first thing that any class needs is called a constructor. So we write constructor. Constructor. It's really important that you spell this correctly. It's really easy to spell it wrong and then have a really mysterious bug, so just be careful. Construct or. Okay, so it constructs something. And this is actually a function. It's what's called a method. So when we have functions within a class, they're called methods. But you might interchangeably hear people call them functions or methods. So just like a function, it needs brackets where we can put any parameters, and also just like a function, it needs a block to open up into. So we have our block now, and inside here we can write any code that we would like to have run when we first make an instance of our cookie cutter. So a lot of information there, but essentially when we want to cut out a cookie, we can run some code. So when I want to cut out a cookie, I'm going to give my cookie a size. And the way we do this is we write this dot and then the name of our variable, so size. And this size is going to be equal to, say, 100. So I've got a 100 wide cookie. So this size variable belongs to my class, cookie cutter. And when I make a cookie, when I make an instance of this class, it's also going to have a size parameter. So let's have a look at the syntax for making a cookie here. So I'm going to say let my cookie up the top here. And just like before, when I wanted to make an object, I'm going to write my cookie is equal to. And now instead of making some object literal where I have a size of 100, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to ask for a new cookie to be cut out for me. And so I'm going to write new cookie cutter, bracket, bracket. And what this is going to do is it's going to instantiate, so make an instance of this class. So it's going to return to me an object, and we're going to store it in my cookie. So when we write new cookie cutter, bracket, bracket, what we're actually doing is we're running the constructor. So that's what the bracket, bracket are talking about here, this constructor. So this is going to create a new cookie object. It's going to run the constructor, which is setting up the size value. And so now we can use that value. So here in draw, I might do a circle in the middle of the screen and base it size off its value. So my cookie.size for the diameter. So if we run this, we should get a circle of size 100. And just like our other objects, we can now start putting in other parameters as well. So I'm going to give it an x, so something like the width on 2. I'm going to say this.y is equal to height on 2. And so now my cookie also has an x and a y parameter. So my cookie.x and my cookie.y. So if we run this, we have our cookie. So this is not really any better than what we were doing before by making objects directly. But now we have this nice template code. We can create lots and lots of cookies. So we've got our cookie cutter, and so now we can cut out lots and lots of cookies. So just for an example, if I change my x coordinate to be random, so I've got a random cookie located on the canvas here. If I wanted to make a second one, so let my other cookie, it's really easy now. So my other cookie is equal to another new cookie. So cut me out a new one, and down here, let's display that other cookie as well. So drawing a second circle, but this time it's going to be my other cookie.x, my other cookie.y, and my other cookie.size. So now I've got two of them. So it's quite easy to make multiple. Just like when we had functions, it's easy to reuse our code. So the real power of classes gets unlocked when we add our own methods. So we see here we've got this constructor method, which all objects have, but we can add other methods that we want to name ourselves. So I'm going to make a method here called display cookie, and this method is going to do this drawing component up here. So what I want to do is I want to draw a circle using this.x, using this.y, and using this.size. And so display cookie is going to draw my circle. So now up the top here, instead of drawing a circle and passing in all of these values, I can simply write my cookie dot display cookie. So I'm calling this method here that belongs to my cookie class, and that's going to take its own x and y and size and draw a circle to the screen. So as I was doing before, it makes it really easy to extend our code, display cookie, and now I can run this. So we have two different cookies created from my class. We're running their method that belongs to them, and we're setting them up with our constructor. The final thing you might want to do is pass values into your methods. So just like any other function, you could take in some value here. So our constructor, for example, could take in an x position, and instead of setting up our x position randomly here, we can say this.x is going to be equal to that x position that we pass in. So now when I go new cookie cutter, this constructor needs an x position to be passed in. So I could put width on 2 for this one, and I could put maybe width on 4 for this one. So now I've got two cookies based on these parameters I've passed into my constructor. A final thing we might want to do is extend our cookies here with a new behavior. So maybe something like update cookies, and this method is going to take this.x and it's just going to add on 1. Okay, this is just an example. And so now up here I go myCookie.displayCookie and myCookie.update cookie. Okay, so now the one on the left should move to the left. So I've got an error here, so whether it has an update cookie, looks like I called it update cookies, so let's get rid of that, and we should be good. So you can see there, R1 is moving to the right. Sometimes you don't want to have to write display cookie and update cookie, so you can make one more method in here called like run, and this method is just going to run both the display and the cookie update methods for us. So here I could write something like this.update cookie and this.display cookie. So I've been kind of glazing over this syntax here of this dot, but essentially when we write this dot something, we're talking about a value that belongs to that particular class. And once we've instantiated our class as an object, it's going to also talk about that particular object. So if I want to run my update cookie method and I want to run my display cookie method, I have to talk about this, so myself. Bit confusing. It's totally understandable if you don't understand it yet, but just know whenever you're talking about a parameter or some method that belongs to a class or object, you've got to write this inside the class. Okay, and so now this code up here becomes really simple. I simply run my code like this. So run is going to handle both updating and displaying the cookie for me. All right, great. So we've now turned what was previously a simple object into a class. We are setting it up here in setup with a custom constructor. So our constructor is taking in a value. This is where we set up all of our parameters, and then we are displaying it and updating it down here. You can see this is quite simple and neat now, and so it's really easy to make an array solution. So now I can have let cookies equal an array. Down here in setup, I'm going to loop through. So let I equal 0, I is less than something like num cookies, I++. Cookies equal, let's say 16. And down in here, instead of just making one new cookie, I want to add a new cookie to my array. So cookies I is equal to a new cookie cutter, and I can pass in any parameter here. So maybe let's just set them up randomly. Now down here in draw, exact same stuff. I can just loop through my array, and I'm going to get cookies I, and I'm going to run it. So this is a really neat syntax for what would otherwise require multiple arrays and a big complicated drawing function. Now everything is down here inside my class, and so if I run this I should hopefully get a whole lot of ellipses moving to the right. And so this makes it really easy for us to work with this code. If I wanted to add a new behavior, I simply add a new method. If I wanted to add some more parameters, I simply add more parameters, so they can have a color, and that's a color variable, etc. So it can be quite tricky to get your head around, so you're going to have to do a little bit of practice. And that's why the next set of challenges are all using classes. So the first one, extending the jitter class, we've already made a class for you, but it doesn't have all the behaviors we want. So currently they're not moving. And we also want you to put it in an array. So that's what we're going to do next. Takes about 20 minutes, half an hour. And then the final step is going to be this custom constructors example where, again, we've made a class for you, but we want you to modify how the constructor works. And if you've got a little bit of extra time, the I extension challenge involves adding additional behaviors to an I class. So in all three examples here, we've already made the class for you, and you're just extending it, adding new behaviors, modifying the way it works. I would definitely recommend when you're at home, make a new sketch, make a constructor and a class for yourself from scratch, just so that you get comfortable with how you actually set up a class. But today we want to make it a nice gentle approach because objects and classes can be quite tricky. So take your time going through these examples, and if you've got any questions, of course, ask your tutor. Alright, so that's it for today's tutorial. From me, you'll be spending the rest of class working on these challenges. It'll take probably about 20-30 minutes for extending the jitter class, and then the remaining challenges will take you to the end of the class today. This is the last tutorial from me, so I'll see you guys in the future. It's likely if you take a future subject here, you might end up having me as a tutor or me making tutorials. So I'll see you guys around. Alright, bye.